Today I'm here with Tayo Rockson, author of Use Your Difference to Make a Difference. Tayo is also the president and CEO at UYD Management, a strategic leadership and consulting firm that helps corporations improve their bottom line by incorporating diversity, inclusion, and social justice strategies. He's also a podcast host at As Told by Nomads that's catered to the next generation of leaders and is heard in 150 countries. Tayo, how you doing today?
I'm doing really well. I can't complain. It's a sunny day in New York City, so I'm basking in the glow of that. How are you?
Always a great thing. Sunny day here in Chicago. So,
Hey, there's a sense of summer vibes going all around. So it's good that the world is starting to brighten up. But no, it's a good day here, and I'm in the middle of work, so I feel blessed.
beautiful. Hey, could you kick things off a little bit about your story and background and how you became CEO at UYD Management?
Sure. I describe myself as a cultural translator and a storyteller. And a culture translator because I'm Nigerian and I grew up in 5 countries and 4 continents by the time I was 17. I also spent some time under 2 military dictatorships and 3 military regimes, first decade of my life. So a lot of those experiences led me down the path of being curious about what bridges cultures together, how to find yourself in different environments, because being the son of a diplomat, that's why we moved around a lot. You're always, interestingly, in a minority or a hidden immigrant. And all those things led me down the path of being creative with my art, but also someone that studies inclusion and leadership. So as I got older, I had several ups and downs, but one of the things that was always constant was trying to bridge divides. And I decided to launch a podcast in 2014 called As Told by Nomads to really explore what it means to embrace a global identity, which led me down the path of opening up a consultant firm to help institutions all over the world to foster their diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies. Led me down to the book and then the speaking and everything that comes to that. So, it's been a long, winding road, but my personal life very much relates to what I do professionally.
Really interesting story. What are your top 3 principles that you can attribute to success?
Well, I know that when we were doing the pre-interview, I said self-awareness, accountability, and cultural competency. I believe those are the 3 I said because those are the 3 that I believe in. But I think in today's world, especially, and even in any century, self-awareness, you have to be aware of where you are, how you're growing, and what you need to learn, and how you're contributing to something successfully or negatively. And then with accountability, especially spending some time in a dictatorship, one of the biggest problems is leaders being unable to be accountable. That really impedes success. And then cultural competency, I mean, you look at the world now, if you can't connect effectively across cultures, it's going to be a big problem.
You ready to take these apart?
Yeah, let's do it.
This is where it gets fun because we don't want to leave it here. We want to turn it into some practical how-tos so listeners can understand how to apply it in their daily life. So first one, self-awareness. Walk me through that. How do you get somebody to turn that into more of a practice?
In the book, I came up with a model. I call it the BTS. So it's understanding your biases, your triggers, and your values. So for our biases, we all have biases. They could lead to good things or bad things, but we all have biases that very much shapes our worldview and how we see the world and who we enter, who we decide to include in our circles. And biases can come from story, they can come from fear, they can come from avoidance or security. So if it's a story, it's maybe someone told you, it's a religion, someone in your sphere of influence has passed on a philosophy, you read it somewhere. If it's fear, you might have had repeated bad experiences with a particular group of people, a particular country, or citizens from a particular country, and then it shaped your idea of that person or group of people. And then avoidance, maybe you don't like talking about difficult topics or topics that have to do with politics or religion. And so you just choose to stay away from it. But we know what happens when you stay away from topics that you don't have is your brain is going to fill it with whatever is out there. And you might not even be consciously aware of that. And then security, a way for you to feel better about yourself. And then the second part of that, I said triggers. You really got to learn how to listen to your body. Your body always tells you when you're scared, excited, nervous. Those things, those little moments when you can figure out you're hot, cold, something's happening. If you can start picking up on those things early on, it really gives you a clue about the environment you're in and whether it's a good place for you to be or whether you need to push yourself outside of your comfort zone. And for values, this is one of my favorite ones to even enunciate is when I do my workshops, I will ask people, institutions to tell me what their 5 core values are. I've not come across any audience that is giving me 100% certainty of this. 4, 3, 2, maybe some know 1. But it's always an interesting experiment for me because many people swear that they know who they are and what they want to do, but they can't tell you why they believe any of those things. And if you look at companies or anyone that goes down for something morally object, you've never seen on a mission statement something that said, I promise to embezzle $20 million or I promise to make these environments unsafe for people of color. If we're not intentionally living our core values, like every day, 5 of them, we are going to be strangers to ourselves and we're going to be doing things the worst versions of ourselves probably feel attracted to. So those are the 3 ways. You understand your biases, your triggers, and your values. That is how you become more self-aware. You become more intentional doing that.
These are really good pillars that actually give me a better understanding. Biases come in so many shapes and forms because it could be off of just your past experience that, hey, whatever it is, this took me back to another similar situation, and that could be a bias or a lot of different ways of looking at that, and being conscious of when you are biased, I think is really, really important. How do you do that? Because I feel like, one, you almost have to consciously understand what bias is. And it reminds me of a book called Seeking Wisdom, where it walks through some reasons why people make misjudgments. And it's all related to different biases. Yeah, if you get a chance, I really recommend. It's a good bedtime book.
I'll have to, yeah.
Because it could, like, one chapter gives you so much to think about. So it's a good, like, bedside book. But it really covers, like, all these variation of biases. And I'm wondering if you have an approach to make sure you're in the state where you're conscious about what biases are that are influencing you, and one, be conscious about it, but then also not let it influence you.
Well, I find that the most important thing we can do in our life is to ask questions. We don't practice our critical thinking muscles enough. And so when you think about anything, let me even apply what you said to education. I, being Nigerian, came to the United States at the age of 17. Nigeria was colonized by the United Kingdom, and I was subject to all these questions. People were very surprised by my ability to speak English and all these things. But even outside of that, as reflected, you learn that in the education system that a lot of Black history isn't told outside of enslavement or colonization. The idea of understanding that is so interesting. So then I think, okay, if I'm in that classroom, I'm a teacher, I'm an educator, and I'm teaching this, a way that I can make sure my biases don't show up is, hey, is it possible that there are other creators who don't look white? Is it possible that they could have existed during this timeline? Or am I just going with what the textbook is? And even that brief pause where you ask yourself, is what I'm doing informed based on something that I've done, or have I actually done time for research? Then you start to realize, okay, everyone, this is what they look like. And my kids are very impressionable right now. And so they're going to accept that. And so I just found myself asking those type of questions. Is it possible that there's another way to look at this? It's just a simple question. Even if I end up with the same conclusion, by the way, right? That little moment where you ask yourself, is it possible? Or what if this is not the only point of view on this? And I found that with any kind of thing, with businesses, with history, with intellectual, property, and honestly, anything you can apply it to life. So just that little prompt that you ask yourself, or even asking your students to do the research to get their muscles working, it helps them.
It makes sense because you're then getting additional information and allowing yourself to put that information together to be more objective in how you're looking at things.
Yeah, well, if you look at the equation of worldview, at least this is how I believe it is. It is, it's lived experience plus exposure. You take away, if anyone always ask me, how can I be better at this? I'll just ask them, well, reflecting your lived experiences and your exposure. What have you exposed yourself to? And what have you, where have you lived and all those areas? But if you're doing that and you're asking yourself that, you're working on that exposure aspect a lot, which will foster that curiosity where you can then have a different lived experience. But anyone's worldview can expand if you put in the time to increase the level of exposure you're putting yourself out there. And again, this is not about indoctrination, because I know that a lot of critics would say, you're trying to make me, you're taking away my, any of these things. And my comeback to that is always, not all tradition is healthy. A lot of tradition was toxic, right? But even before that became tradition, there were things before that became. And so we have to be able to accept that, our way of life isn't just the way it was, because if that was the case, women wouldn't be in the workforce. We would still be having all these little, segregation and all these things, because at one point in time, that was quote unquote tradition. And it didn't seem strange to question that. So I always tell people that. Yeah.
Very good view. Triggers. It was interesting because I almost thought of it as triggers as a tool to get yourself to act on when you need to.
It could be, though.
Almost like a discipline. Like, hey, this is sort of, I'm going to utilize a trigger to start building routine. Trigger. You're, in the video, you're fit, right? So that's like a big thing for people. Can I get a habit of working out? Can I turn a trigger to sort of push myself in that direction?
Yeah. If you can't see now, but I have some weights on the floor strategically placed in different areas. So it's just a reminder, like if I walk past it, have you worked out today, Tayo? So there's that. But the other reason I brought that up is we're so reactive as a world, even more so now, reactive as opposed to reflective. That's what I say. And so when you find yourself just reacting quickly, we live in a world that, the next tweet that gets 500 retweets gets this, and then the Instagram, you become all, it's all this. That's such a high that many people chase consciously and unconsciously because of that validation they get. But when you're left by yourself, sometimes you don't even know who you are. You only know what other people think you are because you emulated something without reflecting on it. And so I'm like, okay, well, what triggered that? Was it your sense for validation? Or was it your fear of being alone? Did you feel like you weren't getting what you were getting from your workplace? Were you unhappy? Do you need to go to a therapist for that? There are all these underlying issues that we don't address, but we are reacting regardless. And it's such an interesting world we live in. But I'm hoping that we start working on that, because I think that's the way we can actually become aware of who we are.
That's a really good point there. And then I like the values part is true. We spent time recently as a business to identify the 5 core values, but it's important to know it consciously as an individual, what those core values are. I don't know. This is the one thing just openly speaking here that I didn't realize, because the values things was there and I've heard about it before for so many years, but I always thought this little soft fuzzy thing, and you kind of put it on your about page in the company or something and it's there. But I didn't realize that understanding it and having clarity actually allows you to make better decisions and sort of achieve your goals when you understand them better. It's almost like you can reverse engineer somebody down to their values, and then it goes the other way. It's like, hey, based on these values, this person's going to be able to achieve this and this.
It's true.
And then you sort of know, like, hey, if there's gaps, then I need to know where I need to work with somebody that maybe has the other values that'll help me achieve that. So I feel like I don't know if you've sort of thought about it in that way, where here's the values, but then how do you sort of align it with the goals you're trying to achieve?
Well, I have honestly, and it aligns with the second point that I said, being accountable. I was just reflecting on things that I was, moments of myself where I realized that I wasn't practicing what I preached, and when you're in the world of diversity, equity, inclusion, what I always tell people is you're never always right. You learn something and then there's another, oh shoot, you alienate these group of people, and you have to re-educate yourself and then make sure you're not participating in othering other people. And I've seen myself participate in that consciously or unconsciously, and I've had to unlearn many things. And I was just wondering how to make it more of a habit. And I said, well, I need to have a value system that enforces these things, that keep me vigilant about these things, but also let me own up to it when I'm wrong, because I don't think we're in a culture that likes to accept people, owning up to that. And even sometimes when people apologize, they'll, some people might come at you for the apology for, oh, why did you give it? So it was a way for me to be held accountable, but also to know that if I did that, I have a sense of security around that, even if other people disagreed. And so it was that firm foundation for me.
I like that. Like looking at your values to hold yourself accountable for the character that you want to be. Let's talk about accountability. Where do we turn ourselves to make that into a practice?
So I'm a superhero nut. I love superheroes. And yes, Superman is my favorite superhero. I know people are going to be throwing stuff at like boo, but I love Superman because, and I always talk about this. People always say overpowered or whatever, boring. But to me, I've always seen it as an interesting experiment on humanity. So here's a person outside, there's an alien that comes here, is raised as a human, but has all this power, yet decides to fight for justice. And that concept, again, growing up in dictatorship, was so foreign for me because I grew up with leaders who had so much power and were just perverted by these powers. And I kept thinking, is that what every person would do if you were given the ability to be near invincible? Would you still choose to do something based on the value system that you have, but also a way for you to keep yourself accountable because that level of power you have could damage other people? How you run, how you walk, the buildings you damage, all these things. And that particular system just stayed with me because I think the older we get and the more power we get and the more influence we get, sometimes we forget about the citizens around us and the people in our circle of influence because we're being watched. And so I was thinking, that concept of being held accountable as you advance is not to handcuff you, it's to keep you more aware of the level of influence you have. Because you say you have a daughter, but I have mentees, and sometimes people will just say, oh yeah, daddy, I saw you, I don't know, you yelled that last time, so I thought, I just did it. Or I saw you throw away this. And then in your head, you're like, wait, what? That's not what I want you to pick up. And so that's what I mean by that, because people are constantly watching us, whether we are aware of that, and we are creating the world that we live in.
That's by the way, Superman was my first favorite hero. Somehow it changed to Batman at some point, but
my brother's a Batman fan.
I think it was just the suit. I think it's the suit and the gadget.
Yeah.
The Superman was a humble, so you started with Superman in advance.
Yeah. That's another case study for Batman. I understand it too.
But it's a mindset approach around it, which I liked the way you frame, because then you get into it where it's like, hey, I have to live up to this. There's accountability around it, but then also I'm responsible for everything, or sort of the actions and reactions that happen.
Yes, exactly. I wrote this towards the end of the book, and I said the ability to change the work to change our world doesn't start, at law enforcement or, in the government. It starts in our backyards and above our shoulders, right? So between our 2 years, what's happening here is going to be emulated by friends, family, and other people. They will take it on to their friends and whether it's good or bad behavior. And I've often looked at the frustrating part of the world where we see a lot of the isms and the phobias, dictating some of our leadership mindsets. And then sometimes the response would be, well, there's no point trying to change the world. They already have all the power. And then I'm saying, well, if that's what you believe, that's the same thing anyone in your family is going to believe, because you've already, modeled this behavior. Then we're never going to get to where you want to get to, because you've already said that this is the way. And so it's maybe it's a painfully optimistic view, but I do describe myself as an angry optimist. But I do feel like, just like you said, a mindset. The way they got there was through a mindset, and also an understanding that people don't do the hard work to love, to push through difficult moments, because it's an easier emotion to be angry. It's an easier emotion to be hateful, and it takes more time to actually push through all those injustices. And a lot of people count on you giving up on one stage and then saying, "Oh, I'll solve your problems," and you can, turn your ears away from all the puzzling, corrupt things I'm doing, because I'm presenting myself as a solution. And I know you're not going to do the research because you're more reactive as opposed to reflective. It all comes back to the same thing. So that's how I've noticed the world anyway, from my perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting the way you put it, because then it also circles back to it circles back to the questioning, so that
Yes.
you understand and have the right information, and then it goes back to your values, so that you're standing up for who you are, and acting the way that you are, and holding yourself accountable. So it's interesting points that tie well together.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. But yeah. That's my firm belief. Those are the three most important things I think we all need to work on.
The accountability, it's interesting because we sort of left it at a mindset ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it does come back to that, because it goes back to the values, goes back to that questioning, understanding.
It's a culture too, though. It's not even just a mindset; it's a culture. So
well, let's talk about that, because cultural competence
yeah,
is the third point you had.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's break that one down.
So culture competency is the ability to connect effectively across cultures. And the reason why accountability is even related to that is I don't think we have enough of an accountability culture. Let's look at any code we have: girl code, guy code, blue line of silence, or any of these things. The idea is, in order for you to be protected, we have to not say something against our brothers and sisters, because it's going to take one of them down, even if what they did was wrong. Right? Oh, you're this, you're a snitch, you're this, you're that. But that is a culture that we've created, that it becomes less popular for you to actually do, quote unquote, the right thing, be held accountable, and quote unquote to connect across cultures. So say, hey, I've never, I'm a Christian. In my school, this is what we do, but you're wearing a hijab. That's against the dress code. Someone that's not culturally competent will say, well, that's against the dress code, and will not understand that that's a part of the person's faith. In fact, that person will only see it through the lens of their lens. Bias comes here and say, you are disrespecting this place, this institution that we have spent so much time. What makes you different from the other person? As opposed to, you're telling that person not to be their whole selves when you get to be your whole self. So that's where cultural competency comes into place. And then other people around will be like, oh, I don't feel like that's right, but I don't want to say anything, because if I say anything, then I'm going to get kicked out. But if I get kicked out, and then it's a whole culture of that, because you haven't modeled that behavior. And that's how that happens, right? Bad behavior gets, replicated or, allowed, because of that fear of consequence. And it consistently happens when we're not culturally competent, because we don't create a safe space for people to challenge something, or for other people to feel like, hey, let me tell you who I am, so you can include that in the policy. And so that's what I mean. I started thinking about this when I used to bring my food to the workplace when I was younger. When I got my first job out of college, I'm Nigerian. They hated. They would make all these comments like, I was like, and then I started thinking about, maybe I shouldn't eat. Everyone is acting like I just brought some poison here. So I was like, oh, how do you eat that? It's disgusting. I'm like, okay, all right, fine.
Wow.
But that's what I mean by that.
Well, there's, when you describe it, I think of judgment versus empathizing, right? Because you're dealing with a lot of sort of judgments, or, hey, I don't understand you, but that food you're eating is really nasty. That you shouldn't be wearing that here. Those sort of, and we do that. It's almost, I don't know if that's a nature thing that we do that, when the reality is, if we took all that time and effort to understand, and I think a lot of this is the understanding why people make the decisions they do before you start arguing with them.
That's such a good point. But you know how you said we do that all the time, and it's almost natural and all these things. That's when I break it down to people, because people will say it's simple. I say, yeah, solving most of our problems today in the world are very simple. It's just not easy. It's a different distinction, because it means unlearning multiple things. It's simple but not easy. Everyone knows not to push someone across this or do that or yell at that, but it happens every day. It happens every day. Someone is doing, this is not to tell, I'm not perfect. That's what I was saying. I'm not perfect. No one's perfect. But if we're not self-aware, we're not going to acknowledge that we're not perfect. If we don't hold ourselves accountable, we're not going to create a culture of people to understand that, okay, when we make a mistake, we own up to that. And then if we're not culturally competent, we're just going to accept some weird status quo that other people all the time. And the cycle will continue if we don't just do the quote unquote simple thing.
It takes some conscious effort.
Yes.
You have to consciously do it. You have to be aware. I think that understanding part, being the understanding mindset before you sort of, I forget, what is like the core part of your brain, that flight or fight mode, fight mode you get into.
Yeah.
It's probably what it is. You just start responding to things, and naturally these past biases come to you, and you need to consciously put that aside and
That's right.
understand, like, there's a reason why people do things. Does that sort of equate to cultural competence?
Yeah, I think a huge part of cultural competency involves humility, for sure. But it's really just the ability to connect effectively across cultures, right? And it's a lot of listening, empathy, like you said, seeing things from other perspective, understanding that two things can be right at the same time and two things can be wrong at the same time. You go to different countries, you start to see people get to the same destination a different way. They were raised a different way, but they have similar, outlooks. But if you investigate it, you're like, I would never do that. Oh, whoa, that's how you do that? It happens all over. And that was honestly, it was the first thing I had to learn moving around so much as a kid, because as a kid, the only thing you want to do is to fit in, at least me. And, I was out there trying to be a chameleon, and so many times that I was losing myself. It had a huge identity crisis because, I would just go all the way out to the other part of this at the expense of who I was initially. And then I eventually, just became comfortable with myself and acceptance of understanding that, yes, I have all these influences, but it doesn't mean I need to strip my identity at the expense of something, but it does mean that I can take away, I can better understand different things. And my dad as a diplomat had to do that as well. And so you understand what makes people feel seen, heard, and understood, while being able to assert yourself as well. So it's a balance, essentially, but it is ongoing.
What's the best mistake you've ever made?
The best mistake I've ever made. Well, when I was getting my MBA, actually it was related to this podcast. I got into Fordham 2013, and I was there till 2015. So I finished. And that's the diploma there. And I decided not to go to any of my recruiting trips, and I decided to launch a podcast in 2014 based on the idea that I didn't want to be in a job that I didn't want to do. And all the recruiters were from finance firms, and I knew my strength was more with telling stories and connecting with people. And everyone, I was the only entrepreneur in my class. Everyone said I was making a huge mistake. In fact, I was wasting and throwing money down the drain. I love my parents. My parents were scared. My classmates thought I was bonkers because I was running around class, interviewing people from different parts of the world. And initially, yes, it did look like, they were right, because I wasn't getting offers or any of these things at first. But I stuck with it. And, I kept writing on my blog and extending and all that. And then eventually one opportunity became two, and three became three, 6 and 6 became 12. But it was a series of things. It was, Trump got elected. It was someone randomly listened to my podcast from the World Bank. It was someone who was making a Google search, and they saw a whole list of different things I'd been writing for a while. And they all said, oh, you've been doing this for a while. Do you want to come do this? And then one testimonial led to a referral, and then a referral became that, became a business. But that was the best mistake I made, not listening or doing what I was supposed to do with my MBA. Yeah.
You got an MBA, then just started podcasting, and
I know. But yeah, that's the biggest mistake, the best mistake I made.
Awesome, Tayo. And if people want to tune in and hear more from you, your podcast is As Told by Nomads?
That's correct. Everywhere you listen to podcasts, As Told by Nomads.
Thank you so much for the time today. I enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you for having me. It's been really fun.